So today's topic, like Lauren mentioned, is on building a culture of belonging within teams, really focus on team building, teamwork, and team cohesion. Um, the focus of this session is really to provide language and offer techniques to help coaches develop the mind pillar, and this week as well as the team pillar. There's a little bit of overlap between mind and team, as there often is with the mind. And the mind pillar means training our minds to maximize performance. And the mind pillar is one of 5 foundational pillars in the USA Volleyball development model. All right, I wanted to start with this quote from legendary volleyball coach Marv Dunphy. Volleyball is one of the most interactive games going. It's a game of intuition, imagination, improvisation, and most of all, reciprocity, of teamwork. There is no way to freelance in volleyball. I love this because it just really demonstrates and captures what a team sport volleyball is, as we all know. So what makes a team? Teams don't just happen. We have to be really, really intentional about how to build a team, how to build team cohesion as a team sport. So what makes a team? Team is a collective sense of we, or a feeling of unity. No surprise there. Every member on the team must know their role and responsibility. I think this is something that often gets overlooked. We're going to dive deeply into helping athletes understand what their role is on the team, the different types of roles on a team, and how we can support those roles through different activities, different team building activities today. Also, established and structured communication. Again, communication in volleyball is so critical. Developing our social skills on and off the court, in between points, during play, all of that is so important. And then lastly, what makes a team is rules and norms that guide behavior. And that's another key topic that we're going to talk about today. So I want to start by talking about the group stages of group development or team development. The first one is forming, and I'm going to dive really I'm going to give you an overview, and then we're going to kind of dive really deep into each stage. Second one is storming. Third is norming. Fourth is performing. I want to start by saying these stages are not linear. It's not guaranteed that every team is going to get to all 4 stages, and the length of time at each stage is very different. But these are 4 common stages that every team is generally going to go through in a season. And by being aware of them, we can help players move through the stages quicker and not sort of panic when we experience conflict within team dynamics throughout the course of the season, as that's to be expected. So first, the forming stage. All right, what does the forming stage look like? If you are a club team, it might look like those early weeks of practice before you have or before you start competitions. For college seasons, it's usually a very, very short preseason, right before your first game, double days time. So forming looks like when the players are really still getting to know one another. They're learning to trust one another. Oftentimes there's some resistance against some sort of leadership hierarchy. There's a little bit of conflict, especially if you have, I see this especially with college teams. Athletes are used to being the leader, star player on their high school or club team, and then they kind of get to a college team, and it happens at every level, right? You have a whole team of leaders, and then those leaders kind of have to battle it out to see who's going to emerge as the new leader. So that leadership hierarchy is it's being built. It's being constructed, and there can be some resistance towards one another. There can be a little bit of friction as they're really trying to figure out where they stand on the team. Athletes testing boundaries. So testing boundaries with one another, testing boundaries with maybe current captains, especially with college teams. You're going to see it with like first years versus fourth years if you have a transfer coming in, and then the power dynamic changes in the leadership, but also testing boundaries with the coaches and the assistant coaches. This next one is a big one. Athletes are really ultimately trying to figure out if they belong and how they belong on the team. But we're going to talk a lot about this one later on. Oh, learning to trust one another. Learning to trust one another on the court and off the court. I think it's important to distinguish the two. They don't need to all be best friends off the court to have really good team cohesion on the court, but there does need to be some level of trust. And so setters learning to trust their hitters learning to trust their setters, learning to trust the libs, goes all the way around, but also learning to trust coaches. How are people going to respond when you make a mistake? All of these things are so important, this trust piece. All right. And at this stage, the roles generally are pretty unclear. We're trying to figure them out. So the athletes are trying to figure them out. They're starting to realize the role that they had on their previous team is a little bit different than it's going to be on this team, because maybe that role's already filled and they kind of have to shape shift and figure out who they are, how they fit in. And then lastly is, this is a big part of this stage too, is the strengths and weaknesses are being judged. So there's no way around that. Coaches are trying to figure out the starting lineup. Everybody knows that. And the athletes are trying to prove themselves. So essentially they're competing against one another while they're also trying to build team cohesion. So it can be a very intense stage with a lot of friction. Hopefully we're not staying in this stage too long. But it depends on your preseason. It depends on what you look like. Hopefully we're getting through it in the preseason, so that when competitions start happening, they're moving through to a different stage. So how can we support our athletes when they're in this stage? So the first one is in intentional introductions and team building time. I can't emphasize this part of it enough. Oftentimes coaches, they just want to get into the gym and teach the skills. And of course, we want all the practice time, all the reps we can get. That's so critical. But if the athletes don't trust one another, if they have low sense of confidence, if they're not communicating, it's just going to end up hurting you later on. So we really want to spend intentional team building time. The preseason team building sessions, dedicated team building sessions, it can be so, so helpful and powerful. Also, during this time, we want to be establishing team goals for the season. So I really want to make sure that everyone has buy-in to the goals. We don't want to just have someone at the top set the goals and just assume that everybody agrees to that goal. We really want everyone to have buy-in into the goals. And then lastly, identify team values. This one is really, really important, especially when we're looking at that belonging piece. We don't want to force values on other players. Oftentimes, in any given team in this country, we're going to have players come in with a really wide variety of values, and there's going to be some overlap. And it can be a really powerful exercise, team building exercise, to have a team force the athletes together and have them identify their shared values together as a team. That can actually be a tool that you use to navigate conflict later on. All right, so this is all stage one, all the forming stage. Really, this is happening in preseason. Last one, review the process. So that review everything that we just kind of talked about with the athletes so that they're aware of the process. All right, next stage is storming. And this stage is marked by internal conflict within team dynamics. Okay, so players are often holding on to what it was like on a previous team. There's that comparison piece, all right? Especially if it can happen if they've already been in the program within a year and they're comparing it to a previous year. Maybe some seniors have graduated. We have new incoming class. It's going to look and feel different, but there's still that comparison piece. Also, same thing with clubs. Maybe they're comparing it to a different club or how it was last season. So that comparison piece is really a big part of it. In this stage, there can be the rivalries can start to develop. Jealousy, competitions for positions is high. The storming stage, often I see it with volleyball players, is once the coach sets the starting lineup, right? There's that the coach sets the starting lineup, and there's a little bit of immediate like response friction to that. Players think they should be in it, or players are highly competitive to get in it. There's going to be some conflict there. Again, this leadership struggle among the starters now becomes even more intense. And we have some conflicts within teammates and coaches. So how can we support this stage? How can we help move our athletes through this stage? One of the biggest things is establishing clear team roles. And I'm going to have a whole section on team roles, so I won't spend too much time on that here. But clarifying team roles is going to really make an athlete feel like they belong on the team. It's going to help them understand how they fit into the team. Secondly is dedicated communication time. And again, I'll talk more about communication later because it's such an important part of volleyball, but we really need to be spending time during these early team building stages to help hold space for athletes to communicate. What are they feeling? What are they afraid of? And what do they want to see change? How can we support them to help move through this stage? And in this stage, as a coach or a mental performance consultant, you're really redirecting and focusing the team on bigger picture goals. So it's kind of that shifting from those internal self to external team perspective. And in this stage, your coach's feedback is going to be extra important. We really, their athletes might feel a little bit more isolated because they're competitive, so they're not quite feeling like a true team yet. So that coach's feedback is going to be really important. And then one thing I cannot stress enough in this stage is navigating through this conflict moves the team to the next stage. So by normalizing conflict within the team, we're empowering the team to actually move to the next stage. We don't want to be afraid of conflict. We actually want to expect it. I would never expect any team to go through a 3 or 6 month season without any conflict. It's just not realistic. Especially when athletes are highly competitive, they want to win, they want to start, they're working hard. There's going to be conflict. We don't need to be afraid of conflict. We need to embrace the conflict and use it as a way to strengthen the team dynamic. So the more that we can sort of not just like avoid the conflict, but actually use the conflict as a way to enter into deeper team conversations, that's going to be really powerful to really cohesively build and form a team. One of the quotes, I'm breaking up the stages here with one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know who said it, but it's amazing what can be accomplished when no one worries about who gets credit. Amazing what can be accomplished when nobody worries about who gets the credit. I love sharing this quote with the team because it is so applicable to what our athletes are experiencing. If we can just stop worrying about who gets the credit, who gets the stats, all of that, and just really focus on what our bigger picture long-term goals are, it's really going to shift the team dynamics. So after the forming and the storming stages, we're moving into the norming. All right. So at this stage, the team is starting to gel. Right. We're starting to start. Usually, this happens when the team has a couple W's. They start to feel a little more confident. They start to feel the excitement of winning. They start to trust each other. Trust between teammates builds. Connection between teammates builds. Also trust within the teammates and the coaches. So coaches put out the starting lineup. Players might not be sure. Start having a couple wins. Players are going to start to trust the coaches as well. Team confidence generally overall increases. And at this point, norms are starting to be established and accepted. So Could be anything from like pre-performance routines to during performance routines on the court, what they're doing, the way they interact with each other, are all starting to take shape. At this stage, player roles and expectations are clear. This is so critical. Athletes know what their job is. They know how they fit into the team. They know how that they truly belong on the team, and what their role and expectation is. At this point, teammates are starting to feel comfortable giving feedback to each other and the coaches. Okay, that the lines of communication are going to be much more open, and people aren't going to be so defensive. And teammates are now able to see outside of themselves, see each other as a team, and be able to look at it from another person's point of view, whether it be their teammates or a coach. It's a little bit of a broader perspective, starting to build that team cohesion. On the red column again, the things that coaches can do in this stage to help celebrate individual and team effort and success. All right, so at this point, we really want to be just celebrating team success and individual success. Also reflecting on progress, so both individual and team progress. But the more we can sort of focus the athlete's attention on the bigger picture, on the progress being made, that's going to be really helpful at this stage. All right, the fourth and final stage is really where we're wanting the team to kind of peak in postseason. So teammates are feeling very motivated because they can kind of see the sort of the long-term goals of the season are feeling close. They're feeling attainable. Athletes are feeling motivated. They're starting to see that they're really part of something bigger than themselves, right? This is really the shift here from the like I to we mentality that we talked about in the beginning. It's really, really important that that we can help shift the athlete's perspective on a bigger, broader picture. And at this stage, in the performing stage, that's when that's going to start happening. It's a shift. It's a shift from a we versus I orientation. So it's shifting from I to we. I think the way it's written might be a little bit confusing, but it's what we're really wanting here is the we orientation, and that's what we're really starting to get. It's really about the team cohesiveness at this stage and what the team's able to accomplish together. Everyone's really feeling a part of it. At this stage, athletes are rising above differences and focusing on the common good. So at this point, where the athletes are not super hyper consumed with whether or not they're fitting in, or if there's subtle differences between them. They're really embracing each other and their bigger goals. Increased trust between teammates, also between athletes and coaches. And at this point, in the stages, the athletes really know and accept their roles, their team roles. They really understand what their role is on the team, how they fit into the team, and what their responsibilities are. Then this is the stage where we're going to have our optimal performance as a team. So at this stage, the coach's job becomes relatively easy. It's a lot of celebration of the team success, really focused on team success. Always giving credit, supporting the athletes and recognizing individual progress and contributions, not just in the immediate, but also throughout the whole season, what it has taken to get to this point. Support team decision-making. So at this point, what coaches are really trying to do is sort of their responsibility is a little bit lower. We're sort of shifting that responsibility to the captains and trusting that when there's big decisions to be made, or when there's conflict, really turning it back to the team and the team leaders to be able to navigate that conflict, to be able to make decisions on behalf of the team, and really supporting team leadership and team decision-making. At this stage, the team should be able to do that. The team should be able to navigate it with a lot less sort of coach interaction. All right, so those are the 4 stages. I'll go back real quick. One thing I just want to add at this stage is, like I said at the beginning, the stages are not necessarily completely linear. You might start at stage, you're going to start at stage 1. You might bounce back and forth between stages 2, 3, and 4. All right. It's not uncommon to kind of get, especially in a longer club type season or a longer college season, when you're kind of bouncing back and forth between stages. The goal is that we are normalizing conflict, continuing to build these helping athletes understand where their roles are, helping them have conflict resolution strategies based on their team identified value system to help them navigate through conflict and really get to a place where stage 4, the performing stage, where there's that tight team cohesiveness, that team, the team is well bonded. And at that stage, we really want to be aiming to peak there during playoffs, right? Or for club, it might be during national or qualifier tournaments. So you might have to hit that peak multiple times. But and for college, we're really looking at aiming for the conference tournament, NCAA tournament around that time. We really want to be entering into that stage 4. All right. So throughout each of those stages, I talked a lot about team roles. And I think that this is one of the aspects of team building that gets oftentimes brushed over, or just not enough time is spent on really clearly identifying team roles. Oftentimes what I see is coaches have a clear idea of what athletes play each roles on the team, but the athletes don't necessarily understand that. The top, maybe the top 6 will, or maybe the like captains and like if there's like a couple of clear, consistent starters, they might understand their role. But oftentimes the sort of like middle to the rest of the team is really not clear. And that's really the source of our problem, is that we want to have clear team roles for everyone on the team, regardless of whether or not you're a starter, regardless of your playing time. So first I want to start by breaking team roles down into formal team roles and informal team roles. All right, these are 2 distinct categories of team roles. So formal team roles are probably the ones that you're most familiar with as a coach. All right, they're going to be dictated by volleyball, by your sport, clearly set out by your coach. For example, formal team roles might be positions, right? So examples of formal team roles could be, it can be like a team coach or an athletic trainer is also a team role. Team captain, also player positions such as like setter, libero, opposite, middle. Those are all really clear team roles. All right, they're set out on the score sheet, right? If it's a college, maybe they're up on the website. Everyone knows them. That's what they are. They know what position they play. Those are examples of clear team roles. Oftentimes, the court captain, right, is also a clear team role. An athlete can have more than one formal team role. But the informal team roles are less sort of well known. They're not as clear. They tend to evolve naturally over time based on interactions with teammates. So they're typically less clearly defined, but are really equally critical to the success of the team. So examples of team roles might include like things like the spark plug of the team, the maybe like the hardest worker or a mentor, a team comedian, the social planner, the motivator, the person who is in charge of snacks at all the tournaments, the sort of team parent. These are team roles that sometimes you'll have a player that just sort of naturally takes on that role and owns it, and it's really clear, but oftentimes it's not clear. And one of the things that you can do to really help athletes feel like they belong on the team is help clarify both their formal and informal team roles. So how do we do that? First, we want to teach the athletes about team roles and help them identify what they are on the team. So I love doing this with athletes at the beginning of the season. If I'm doing a preseason team building workshop, this is one of the things that's like definitely going to be in here. We're going to really help the athletes identify usually what happens is the athletes know their formal team role right away. They just write down their position or captain, whatever it is. But their informal team roles, some will know it right away and some really don't know it and have to think about it. And so it can be a really fun team building exercise to have them identify their informal team roles. And then one of the things I do is if an athlete says that they are the team comedian and that's their job, is to just like always make it light, when people are stressed or they're they're not feeling good, the team comedian make it light. But if no one on the team thinks they're funny, then they can't be the team comedian. So they all have to agree on the informal team roles, and that can be quite a fun and sort of funny team building thing as well, when they all sort of agree on each other's informal team roles. And then the next step is moving into what are the responsibilities of your team role. And you can do this both for formal and formal. So what are the clear responsibilities? Again, for formal, it's so everyone knows the answers right away. For informal, it may be less clear. And so helping them really identify what their formal team role is, that is going to be really important. And it's going to make them really feel like they are needed on the team. And then the next part of the process is to ask the athletes, how are you going to know if you're succeeding in your team role? Like, how are we going to be able to evaluate this? All right. So again, using the team comedian as an example, if that might be making people laugh. If they're making people laugh consistently, then they're succeeding. If they're not, then they're not being effective. It can sound trivial, but it can be so important for athletes to be able to recognize, like, how are they going to be able to be successful in their team role. And this is another big part of it, is what are the consequences of failing to fulfill the responsibilities of your team role. So if someone's role is the snack person and they're in charge of all the meals and all the snacks, right? If they don't do their job right, the team is gonna maybe be hungry, or they're gonna have to wait a really long time because the post game dinner plan isn't set. So there can be some real clear consequences. But what we're doing throughout this process is helping each other gain appreciation for the sort of invisible work that often gets done on teams, and recognizing that there's a lot that goes into team building, both on and off the court. And then this last one, I highlighted it in red because I think it's so important. And this is one that often, again, gets missed. Are there any conflicts in our team roles? And how do you navigate the conflict together? So for example, if we have one person's team role is to just be like the hype person, they're just like, their job is to fire everyone up. And then another person identifies their team role as the calm. They're just going to be chill and calm everyone down when there's stress. Well, at some point, those two roles might be in conflict with one another. And so instead of letting it escalate and feeling like they're competing against one another, we can actually take those two polarizations, those two role polarizations, and actually get them working together to recognize actually our roles are really close together. Maybe they're even on a spectrum, and we have to figure out, when should you do your role more? When should I do my role more? When do we need the hype? When do we need the calm? Or maybe are there certain people that need to be pumped up and are there certain people that need to be calmed down? We're shifting the team dynamics from two players that could potentially really be in conflict with one another to a posture of actually they're the two that have to work closest together. That can be a really powerful shift in team dynamics. And there's so much you can do around this team role building. One of the, to give an example of another sort of team building fun kind of game that you can build this into with your athletes is, once everyone has identified their team roles, then ask them to come up. You can put them in small groups because maybe it's too much for one whole team, but put them in smaller groups and then ask them to, within their informal team roles, come up with a story or a scene, an example of how their team roles might be in conflict with one another, and then they have to figure out how they're going to resolve the conflict, and then actually have them do an improv. Improv is so helpful for team building. You can actually ask them to act it out, and then they really start to embody their role, and they can start to see it from different perspectives of how their role might come into conflict with one another, and they start to not be so afraid of conflict. And that's the main thing here. We can't freak out when there's conflict on our team. We always have to embrace it and use it as a team building opportunity. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into the next slide. I wanted to highlight and just introduce folks to the VIA classification of character strengths and virtues. The VIA character strength assessment is a self-assessment of character strengths that can be taken online for free. So coaches can have their players take the strengths test online to learn more about their athletes, more about their teams. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this. So on this slide, what I have is you'll see the blue boxes on the sort of going down the middle column of the screen are sort of the main virtues, and then all of the items listed that have pictures on the right side of the screen are different aspects, different strengths that a player might have. So this is all based in positive psychology. And positive psychology really asks what is right with people instead of what's wrong with them. So I am of the belief I really like to focus on strengths, really focus on creating a culture of positivity that talks about player strengths. So again, we're focusing on their strengths instead of their weaknesses here. And you can start so sometimes I'll have my players just actually take the test and identify their top skills. But another thing is you can just actually ask players to share this type of worksheet. You can go on the website, get the worksheet, share this worksheet with players, and we're actually building a strengths vocabulary. So we're starting to see all of these different sort of strengths that athletes might have as teammates, as players on a team. And then it helps support their team roles. So one thing that you can do, you can start with questions like, what do you like best about yourself on or off the court? Like, what aspect of your game are you most proud of? Many athletes, especially female ones, are socialized to be more humble and quiet. And so when asked to talk about their strengths, there might be a fear of appearing overconfident, when in the reality is what we're actually wanting to do is build confidence. And so this is a great way to do that, by actually getting the players to identify and name and really start to embody that strength about them that makes them unique. So one activity, so I'm trying to give some examples of activities, really applicable activities you can do with your teams to help build teams. One example of an activity would be to share the worksheet with your athletes and ask them to identify their top 5 player strengths from this list. And then you can actually ask them to narrow it down to just one strength. So ask them to pick the top 5 and then kind of narrow it down to one can be really helpful. And then what we want to do is get them thinking about how to make this really applicable to volleyball. So once an athlete has really identified with one core strength, we're going to ask them, like, how can you use this strength more in practice and in games? So how is it showing up? How would I know if I'm watching you play? How would I know? How would I see the evidence that this is one of your team strengths? So for using the example of teamwork, team player, that, I want to be able to see that in practice. I want to be able to see that in games and tournaments. And I also want to see it off the court, interaction between players, right? So that's what we're trying to get players to do, is identify with their strength and then really embody it. And I want to make clear that for this activity, it's important that it comes from them. So it's not a coach saying, I want you to be this for our team. It's really coming from the player, helping them identify like what's most authentic to them. And the coach's role in this is to help bring it out, to help bring it into the team and help the athlete really embody that role or that strength to contribute to the team dynamic. But this is a really important question to ask. Now, all of these questions, I've sort of taken the strength-based assessment, and I'm really trying to apply it specifically to volleyball. So what situations are blocking you from using your strength? All right. If your core strength is perseverance, for example, what is preventing you from persevering? It's really important that we recognize, are there any strengths, anyone have strengths that are in conflict with one another? So if self-regulation and self-control, managing your impulses or reactions and keeping everyone like calm and steady is your strength, and someone else's is going to be humor, bringing smiles, playful energy, those might be in conflict at some point during games or practices, right? During tournaments, they're going to come into conflict. So again, recognizing everyone's individual strengths, but also recognizing when they come into conflict with one another. And then another great question to explore is, what can we change on the team that allow you to use your strength more? So one thing, again, that I really like to do is the players that feel like they can be in conflict with one another, go ahead and put them together and force them to figure it out. How can they use both of their strengths together? Or what situations can they anticipate? It's a lot easier to do it in advance, proactively, than it is to navigate the conflict when they're already when the emotions are already escalated. And then lastly, go ahead and I like having athletes partner up with a team member and really figure out how might you use your differing strengths to support one another. So putting these strengths together and asking the athletes to identify, how can we help them use, or how can we help each other use your individual and unique strengths that everyone has and really help the team. Right. Okay, so everything we've done so far is sort of leading up to this concept of the critical difference between a team culture of fitting in versus a team culture of belonging. The goal is to develop a better understanding of your team's experiences and values and needs as a strategy for conflict resolution and team building. So the goal is not always to recruit players or force players to fit into your team culture. The goal is actually to create a team culture of belonging on the team that can embrace people's differences. This is maybe it feels like a subtle but sort of a huge shift that oftentimes we'll hear coaches trying to recruit athletes, that feel like they'll sort of fit in, and there's that can be it can lead to really non-inclusive team dynamics, especially if you have invisible identities that maybe are athletes are feeling like they have to hide or shapeshift to actually fit in. So what's the difference between fitting in culture and a culture of team belonging? Fitting in culture really pressures sameness and social compatibility. So we're in this type of team dynamic, we're really wanting everyone to like sort of act, look, and behave the same way. It also ostracizes people who don't fit the mold. Versus a team culture of belonging really encourages players to bring an authentic self to the team. So in this place, we're really we're celebrating everyone's unique gifts, contributions, differences. There's space for all of it. The idea is that we're teaching teams to actually be able to embrace differences, and this is so powerful. So some of the ways that I will do this with teams in the beginning of the season is really having dedicated conversations with the athletes about hard conversations like implicit bias. Asking, it can be as simple as having a team discussion where you're asking players like, name something important about yourself that nobody would ever really know about, maybe by just looking at you or looking at your social media profile or watching you on the court. And asking athletes to maybe share like an example of someone that has made a negative or incorrect assumption about them that was not true, and exploring how that made them feel. It can also ask athletes to share about a time maybe where you misjudged a teammate or you misjudged a person, and that person eventually overcame their first impression. So these types of conversations are really designed to break down implicit bias. We're really wanting to do is we're really wanting to learn about one another and help athletes ultimately get curious about one another. That one went out of order. So the last one was forcing culture fit. And this sort of forcing athletes to assimilate into a dominant team culture. That is part of the fitting in, which was what we're not wanting to have on teams. All right. I added this in. This is from my workbook. This is a little tool that I use that might be helpful with, I use it with club and college teams. Highly especially recommend it with clubs. It can be, the contract itself is more symbolic. It actually would, I find that the thing that's most useful about it is actually as a tool to have a preseason conversation. This is really happening in preseason, where athletes are having a dedicated conversation about gossiping and bullying and cliques. We're really trying to be proactive about changing the sort of like helping athletes really recognize that this is a problem, that gossiping is a form of bullying on teams, and gossiping on teams will fracture friendships, it'll shatter trust between teammates, it damages confidence among players, and yet gossip still occurs so regularly on every team I've ever been on or worked with or seen. It happens, and oftentimes players don't even realize that they're doing it. And you as coaches, I'm sure, can relate. Just think back to some of the teams that you've been a part of or that you've coached. It's always an issue. So changing the pattern can really, really start with awareness. We can begin by just being mindful of our own words and the feelings that they stir up, and notice how encouraging players to notice how speaking negatively about someone triggers certain feelings in them. How do they feel after they talk about someone or after they say something negative about someone? And so this is a sample of a contract. What we're asking players to do in this contract is really agree to a team guideline, right? A team rule. And I would encourage you to modify it, make it your own. But some of the key things that I've found that are really important would be getting players to agree to not talk about their teammates when they're absent. All right. This is going to be, for club teams, it happens a lot, right? When we're ride sharing tournaments, long days, or when we're socializing outside of tournaments. But for college players, one of the biggest places it happens is going to be in when we're overnight travel tournaments, right? When we're sharing hotel rooms and players are in different rooms and there's different rooming arrangements. It can often sort of spark up there. So really asking and getting players to agree not to speak about their players when they're not there, speaking up and intervening, addressing it if it does happen, and then like speaking out against all forms of toxic gossip, against microaggressions, against bullying, and really avoiding all forms of negative self-talk. So what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to create an inclusive team environment that's gossip-free, that does not have microaggressions that are triggering athletes. So we're really creating a space that athletes can feel safe and encourage one another. And every team I've ever worked with is usually really happy to agree to this. And I even invite them to just kind of think about past teams and how it felt, and ask them to maybe do a little imagery and just imagine the team without any sort of gossip. Like if we could really agree to this and make this happen, what would that feel like? What would it feel like to your confidence? What would it feel like to your relationships? Just how would you feel if you just knew your teammates really had your back? And it can be a really, really powerful tool. So, like I said, this worksheet's just a tool. You can use it, make it your own, but it can be really helpful. I love this quote because it just really, I think, captures everything we're trying to do here, everything I'm trying to do here. So relationships with people are what it's all about. You have to make players realize you care about them. They have to care about each other and be interested in each other. Then they start to feel a responsibility towards each other. They want to do it for each other. And that's really what this is about, is really helping athletes get to a place where they care about each other. They don't have to be best friends off the court, but they can show up and have respect for one another, have their backs, compete together, and build that really cohesive team dynamic, even if they're not best friends. And that's something that's really important to teach. Right. So one thing that I do want to make sure we talk about is communication. Volleyball is such a social sport. We are constantly talking. The plays are short, and then we have, or sometimes they can be long. There's a lot of communication happening on your side of the court, and then the point ends, and then there is a different type of communication. So first thing we need to do is we have to teach our athletes to learn how to talk. I hear it so often, coaches yelling at players to talk more, but the athletes, when they hear that, they don't know how to talk. So they just start saying, "Oh, my bad. Good job. You got the next one." And it's not that those things are bad, but it's not really productive. It's not tactical. It's not technical. So we really want to help teaching our players how to talk. Okay, well, before we get to that one, 3 things about teaching players how to talk. So one thing I like to do is teaching players to communicate really concisely. So when we're talking about when the ball's in the air, when we have really short amounts of time where we can actually communicate with each other on the court, we really want to help players communicate concisely and effectively. The second one is listening. That's such a huge part of communication. Oftentimes when we say we need to improve our communication, players hear it as, I need to talk more. But the other part of that is I need to listen more. And that's a really important piece. And then the third one is actually providing acknowledgement that you heard and comprehended what the other person said. So whether it's your teammates or whether it's a coach, we really want to teach players to acknowledge, it doesn't have to be long. It just has to be, got it, let's do it. Or I'm confused on that. Can you explain it more? Or something like that. So if you don't acknowledge that you heard your teammate or your coach, then there is doubt, like that you might not have been heard or understood. So the acknowledging piece is really often overlooked among players. And one of the best steps that you can take to improve your communication with athletes and coaches is to really make that commitment to always acknowledging them, both on and off the court. All right. The next thing I want to, next 2 types of communication, I want to distinguish between during play communication and between play communication. This is really unique to volleyball. It's very specific to volleyball. When we're talking about teaching players how to communicate in a team sport, we need to help them distinguish the difference. So between play communication, when the ball hits the ground and they're point resetting, it's going to be things like calling out the setters in the front row so your team can make an adjustment defensively if she's an offensive threat. It's going to be singling out a weaker blocker on the other team that should be targeted on offense. Maybe it's distinguishing if there's a strong hitter on the opposing team that needs to be committed to on blocking or adjusted to on defense. Or it can be calling out hitter tendencies in a specific rotation. All of these things, right, are also like setters obviously calling out the offensive plays if setters are going to be doing that. So these are things that happen. Ball hits the ground. This is the type of communication that we want to be encouraging in our athletes. Often, this is what should be happening in the huddle. This is what should be happening as soon as the ball hits the ground and before the next serve happens, rather than players wasting time going, "Oh, my bad, I got the next one." No, it's not your bad. That is it as helpful as all of the things that I just listed? So we wanted to help players distinguish that from during play communication. So what does during play communication look like? Well, it's obviously going to be calling the ball, right? Whose ball is it? Calling it loud and early on serve receive or on defense. Can also be helping your teammates identify whether the ball's in or out, following the ball to the line if it's close. For defenders, calling out hitter shots or identifying a tip early on defense if you're able to read the hitter and see it coming. And then also on offense, signaling an audible play in the middle of a rally to target a weakness, especially if they're out of system. So this is the type of communication that we want to be teaching our athletes. Again, I think it's so important to be able to teach our athletes how to communicate, not just tell them to communicate. All right. This is a list of team building exercises. I'm not going to spend too much time on here because we've pretty much covered all of these things, but these are all the team building exercises that I just went over, just to help you recognize that these are all really effective strategies that you can implement into your practices, into your preseason, or during downtime, during tournaments, that you can do to actually help build team cohesion during any sort of downtime or dedicated time in preseason to help your team actually become stronger. And I'm just going to leave you with 3 takeaways here, 3 key takeaways. First one is navigating through conflict advances the team to the next stage of development. So coaches, when you are facing conflict on your team, remember this. This is normal. This is to be expected. Helping the team figure out how to navigate this conflict is actually part of the process. All right. The goal is it's more important that we're teaching our players how to navigate conflict effectively so that they can continue to do it throughout the course of the season. And it is to just navigate the immediate conflict and sort of get past us. And it's actually what we need to do to get to the next stage. It's part of the process. Number 2, identifying clear formal and informal team roles. Again, formal team roles are oftentimes really clear, but the informal ones are less clear. And so especially when we're talking about non-starters, really clarifying their informal team roles and responsibilities can be a really powerful way to help athletes feel like they belong on a team. And then lastly is creating a culture of belonging instead of forcing culture fit is how we can make our team safer and more inclusive for all of our athletes. Right. Just ending. This is how you can get a hold of me. If you want a copy of any of those worksheets that I discussed or the pledge, it's all in that workbook. You can download that for free on my website. And these are resources